Welcome to our fourth session of the day, AI Agents, Disrupting Automation and Reimagining Productivity. Praveen Akkiraju, Artem Harutyunyan, Daniel Vassilev, and Ruchir Puri will join us on stage to discuss the transformative impact of AI, like yours truly, and how they are automating complex workflows and creating new efficiencies across industries.
Well, great. Welcome, everyone, to this exciting conversation on AI agents. Seems to be the topic du jour in the AI community these days. And we have quite an interesting sort of set of panelists here. Hopefully, we'll get their perspectives, both from a builder as well as from a deployment point of view. So I thought I'd just maybe start off with a very basic question. How do we define AI agents? And I think depending on who you ask, you get very different answers. So why don't we start off with that? Artem, maybe I'll throw it over to you and get us going.
Yeah, I think agent is one of those words where it's vague enough and intuitively understanding that everyone has their own definition of it. I think initially the idea behind it was that it's something that you can describe what you want to do as a human, as you would describe to a human, and then it goes and figures it out how to do it. I think by now it evolved like everything is called an agent, so it's hard to say. But in my mind, it is still that thing where you can explain your goal as you would explain it to a human, and then it just goes and does it.
Awesome. Dan, how about your perspective?
I get this question a lot actually on sales calls, and I try to typically break it down for buyers by describing it as copilots and autopilot. And so I think a lot of people are quite familiar with copilot-based assistants, things like ChatGPT. I think they're starting to get quite comfortable with that. But the thing that I try to communicate when we talk about agents, and what I think is really the value that they kind of tap into, is the autopilot piece. It's all about doing work, delegating work to an agent. Can it do it on autopilot, autonomously? Can it make decisions? Can it handle non-deterministic flows? And I think those are some of the characteristics that encapsulate an agent. And so for a lot of buyers out there who are starting to think about, how should we think about agents? There's a lot of noise out there. What's software? What's AI? What's agents? I think just a very simple framework is trying to evaluate, is this an autopilot-based solution? Does this help me achieve an autopilot style of autonomy? And that doesn't mean you won't have guardrails, escalations, approvals, but that's a helpful way of kind of breaking down, I think, software and agents in the current noise of all the different marketing terms being used by a lot of companies. So that's how we like to think of relevance, very much in autopilot terms, and moving away from copilot and helping companies start decoupling their output from just their headcount.
Awesome. And Ruchir, you have a very interesting vantage point, both as a researcher as well as somebody who works very closely with customers deploying these. How would you define agents?
I think one thing we'll all agree on, there's a lot of agent washing going on. I would actually take a perspective, and I'll define it very precisely for you, actually. If you look at sort of the models, let's start with the AI models, large language models, which is the foundation of the sort of the generative AI era. What these models do is you actually type something, you take a prompt, you send it to the model, you get a response. That's what ChatGPT does. And if you are not happy with the response, you retype the prompt. There's a profession coined called prompt engineering, which I think will disappear actually soon. And this is where agents come in actually. Most systems, that's actually in engineering, that's called a feed-forward system. You take an input, you give it to the system, you get an output. If you're not happy with the output, too bad. Refine the input. You refine the input as a human. What do agents do? Agents actually say you give it an input, a task, you give it to the model, and this system now is more sophisticated than a model. It can take that task, it can break it down into multiple steps, also called a plan. It's going to call various tools at its disposal, and I'll start pointing out to you the sort of the synergy you are getting with humans at this point. So this particular system now, AI system, let's call it, I have not named it agent yet, let's call it sort of an AI system. It can take a task / prompt, It can actually break it down into multiple steps, plan, and then it can call different tools for each of the steps potentially, and then it can execute. And then it can look at the output and say, is this right? And if it says, well, this is not right and that is not right, so it can reflect, and then it can go back and refine the inputs automatically as well. So you are starting to get from what is known as a feed-forward system to a feedback system automatically. And this is what, precisely in technical terms, is why agents are so, so awesome. Because they bring AI systems from a primitive era to an era where each of us, humans, are. We are all feedback systems. We look at tasks, we plan, we call various tools, we execute, we look at the results, and if you don't like the results, you go back and refine. And that's why I think, at least in my mind, I define agents quite precisely. And that's why I'm trying to avoid this question on, is this an agent or not? I will find out, actually, because if you look under the hood, you will find out very easily. We can label it anything, copilot or whatever we want, but the technology underneath it speaks for itself. And once you get to these feedback systems, they are amazingly powerful because they can call sort of external tools that enterprises have trusted for very, very long.
Right. Yeah, that's a great, precise definition. And I think one of the things that's been interesting to watch, right, is just the evolution of these models. And now you started to see, OpenAI, Claude, everyone talk about sort of agentic frameworks, right? So when you think about it from a technology perspective, what are some of the key elements of the AI, models or technologies today that are key to enabling agents? So maybe Ruchir will start with you, and then we can kind of get others' perspective as well.
So I think key is the number one, I would say, where you can go wrong is, and this is where I'll bring a more practical perspective now from an enterprise's point of view, sort of ability to be able to plan and reason in certain domains. Now, you can make the agent very generic, and I don't think it'll make it successful. So grounding and specialization is key to the success of agents, which is you are in a certain domain, plan and reason in that domain. And there's a lot of sort of literature written, and this very popular topic with media these days on, do these models reason, actually? I sort of sidestep that question sometimes regarding, to me, the real question is, do they reason in a certain domain? So that's the first task.
Right.
The second task, I would say, will be sort of, as you plan, taking some of these steps and, as I said earlier, trying to call the right tools at the right time. I'll give you a very concrete example. Try to give ChatGPT a simple prompt on adding 2 general numbers. It's likely to get it wrong because it is not a next token prediction problem. It may get it right by just sheer luck, but it's not a next token prediction problem. Can somebody tell ChatGPT to please call a calculator? We've used it for like thousands of years in some form or the other. And this is where it is important to know what tool to call when. That capability is called function calling, actually. Now, these models can call the right tools at the right time. That's the second step. And the third step is, think of it as a sort of the ability to be able to execute those, so having an environment in which you can execute those tasks as well. And the fourth one is really what I'll say reflection. I call it consistency checkers, verification, looking at your results. And if you ask me one thing that is most critical to the success of agents, it'll be that verification step or consistency checking or this reflection part. Because if you get that wrong, then you are not able to refine actually things as well.
Makes sense.
And in domains where things are a lot more sort of, you can check consistency a lot better, those are the domains in enterprises which will be more successful first.
I think to your point on feedbacks, Artem, we've talked a lot about sort of how do you get deterministic outcomes out of inherently non-deterministic models. I think Ruchir laid out a great framework. So what has sort of your experience been as you've sort of built some of these systems?
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of Twitter demos. We got excited about being able to order burgers and airline flights and so on. But if you think about it, the things that make sense to automate, to get more productive at, are the ones that are A, important, and B, repetitive. And so now we're in this world where, like, okay, repetitive. I have, sales, emails to send or support tickets to answer. So now if you think about it, if you have 1,000 of those every day, and then each of those workflows consists of, let's say, 10 micro steps. You have to look something up, make a decision. And if at each micro step you are essentially rolling dice. You're rolling dice, and yes, maybe your dice are really good and you're at like 95% precision, which you aren't right now. So like that error may compound in a very, very bad way. And this is the reason why everyone has shifted. Because if you asked half a year ago, the consensus was that like the agents would solve software and like we can all go home. But everyone realized that no, it's not going to work. So now we kind of, by narrowing the domain, we're kind of helping ourselves. We can write like more precise prompts, but it's almost like cheating. Yeah. And so the way we're thinking about this problem is that you don't want to roll dice every time you're sending a customer email or doing anything of that nature. So I think where AI really shines is getting to this step where like I have an intent as a human and I want computer to do something like write code or something of that nature. But once it is done once, like dice rolling is over. I want that thing to be working 100 out of 100 times. Right. And that's why I think there is a way where we saw the demo previously on like generating code on the fly. So there is this like happy medium ground where like if you build the system right, you can give non-technical person an ability to essentially create code, although they don't know that they're creating code, and give them tools to verify it, to refine it, to debug it, to make sure that it works right. And then if you have to do it 10,000 times, there is no AI, or like there's very little AI involved in that.
And Dan, I think you're talking about sort of use cases. You guys have been able to kind of consistently demonstrate, an agent at scale, right? In your particular use case, maybe share a little bit of sort of your learning and insights from that process.
Yeah, I mean, so our goal has always been we want to help companies deploy an AI workforce, and in order for that to do its job, it has to be robust, reliable, and accurate. And I think one of the things that a lot of people don't necessarily realize, and sometimes a bit counterintuitive, is that step one in that process is not actually thinking about the technology. It's not the technical limitations that most companies stumble on, it's the process. What is the unique workflow that your business does for that specific process that makes it successful? So with sales, for example, one of the, I think, mistakes that people make is, well, let's just try to do something at scale that's very generic, not very unique to our business, and we're going to hope that it works. And the reality is that's not going to work, because even if you had 1,000 people in your company just doing that job very poorly, you wouldn't be getting good results. And so one of the things that we really focused on from the beginning was, well, let's make sure we're building for the domain expert, because the domain expert is the one that has that hidden knowledge. We want to have the AI workforce absorb as much of that hidden knowledge as possible so it can execute those proprietary workflows, those unique workflows that make that business special, that make that process successful. And so for one of the reasons why we've been able to produce success at scale with agents running on autopilot is simply because step one has always been, what's your process? Let's map that out very clearly. Understand what you would teach a human to do if they were to do it successfully. And let's do it extremely uniquely. So as an example, instead of doing a very high-level surface, we research on LinkedIn what your role was and just say, hey, congrats, we actually do something extremely specific. Maybe we go to Glassdoor and we find the complaints that people have about interview processes. So if we're selling an applicant tracking system, we can then tie our value prop to some of the pain point that candidates have. It's really difficult scheduling meetings with you. Well, actually, my software can help you solve that. So you can go really specific and really deep and do high-quality work.
Yeah, that makes sense. And just maybe kind of double-clicking on the use cases, Ruchir, you work with a lot of enterprises. What are some of the use cases that you're seeing people experiment with? Dan talked about sales, right? Seems like a domain-specific thing. What are some other examples?
I think we are It's still early in that game. If you really go by the more precise or the right definitions of agents, if you just rebrand assistants as agents, then that work has been going on for a while.
Right.
So I just want to clarify, when I say real use cases of agents, I really mean sort of the definition that I believe all of us agree on and have been discussing. And it's still early in that game, but where we are seeing, I would say, most traction and excitement around in the enterprises domain, software is certainly one of them.
Yeah.
Software development is a key one, because you take the applications and the value delivery from complete my line of code to solve my issue. And interestingly, if you look at the life of a sort of a day in the life of a developer, no, it's not too different. Of course, the life and death situation is different than a doctor. You come in the morning, you got for a doctor, you got 40 patients, 40 cases to look at. Of course, the impact is dramatically different. But you come in as a software developer in a team, you open up your issues, go to the tab, say, oh, damn, I have 40 issues assigned to me today. And by the end of the day, it may become 50. And if you solve that, that is end value delivered to me. It's not just code completion anymore. Like, if you can take 10 of those away from me, that's real value, actually, that I can benefit from, that enterprises can benefit from. And as I pointed out, in that scenario, in software and computer science, we have been blessed for like 6, 7 decades that things are kind of verifiable, that you can check the consistency, you can test it, there are linters, all kind of tools available. Right. The second one I would say will be, and those are the two I'll point, sort of in sales, procurement, sort of that's one area where we are seeing a lot of traction as well. And I think the third one I would say will be kind of HR domains, because there are workflows, there are processes, there are tools. Tools are trusted as well. And if you get it wrong, there are implications to it. Right. So just making sure you reflect on things, you consistently check it, and then refine things. Those are sort of 3 broad domains, I would say, where we're seeing a lot of traction.
Sounds good. Is sort of human in the loop sort of a reality in the current sort of agent deployments? How do you guys see it in your experiences? Agents supposed to be autonomous, right?
Right.
How do you sort of draw the line there?
One example that I always mention to customers, for example, if you're in recruiting, right? So like you have a person who does the recruiting. If you ask them, is your day-to-day repetitive? Most likely they will say no, because they'll say every candidate is different, hiring managers are different, positions are different, teams are different, and so on. So they are paid to make this like split-second decision, basically looking above the fold on LinkedIn and like very quickly pattern matching. That takes what, like 200 milliseconds, maybe 300. But then to process a candidate, they spend minutes and minutes and minutes to like put them into the tracking system, send them an email, like remind them, go ping hiring manager, and on and on and on. And the way we approach this problem is that there is this like the real intelligence part, where it's very hard to take away until and unless we reached AGI, which is its own kind of can of worms that we probably should not open right now. But like everything else, it just makes absolutely no sense that I sit and then I copy and paste from like LinkedIn's underlying database schema to the Google Sheets underlying database schema to the Slack. It just makes absolutely no sense. And this is the part that we wanna focus on. So we don't try to replace our pitches, not like stop hiring humans, but more like the humans that you have should be doing 10 times more or 100 times more, and be more like satisfied with what they do and the results that they deliver. So that's how we approach it.
Makes sense. And Dan, I think you made an interesting point, which is you should really be thinking about agents from the perspective of the end user, right, of the business user. I think Ali made the same point as well this morning, right, in some of the examples that she gave. So what does that kind of look like? You talked about co-designing almost, understanding the process. is each agent going to be customized that way, or do we get to some level of like generic sort of agent then with a layer of customization? Is it the integrations that need to be customized? Like, how do you think about that line between, something out of the box versus something that's, customized?
So I think that's a difficult balance to strike, and that's something that we're trying to figure out. But I think the key insight that we found so far is that without customization, you don't get to success. And so what we're trying to do for customers is we want to give them a great starting place. So we'll try to get 80% of the way there with a great template, both from us or from our marketplace of community, creating that content, creating agents for different use cases. But we never want to discourage someone from customizing for their use case. And ideally in our world is we want the end user to be customizing it for their specific workflows and flows. And so for us, that means building a really no-code environment for creating these agents, for testing these agents, for monitoring them. You mentioned human in the loop. When we think about an organization, right, how do you make sure your junior employees don't make a mistake? I think you can apply that exact same principle to your AI agents. You have code reviews for a reason. You have maybe a sales manager reviewing emails before a new SDR sends one out. We think it's very similar for AI agents. These are junior employees that are joining your organization today. And we build in escalation pathways so that when the agent doesn't know how to do something, it can request a manager to help it, or a human to help it. But we're trying to, again, think of it from a perspective of, again, from an autopilot lens, which means that if you're delegating work to someone, they're not sitting next to you all the time. And as you mentioned, you prompt in and out constantly. They go do work as much as they can, and only if they hit a certain point do they come back to you. And similarly with approvals, right? If they're doing a sensitive action, you want to tell hey, before you send out this payment for over $10,000, come ask for approval. Similar with an agent, you want that process. So for us, the way we think about it is we want to give them the ability to customize every agent, but we also want to make it easy to start with. And that's why whether it's in sales, marketing, recruiting, or beyond, we try to create templates for them to build from, and then give them the infrastructure and the tooling so that the domain expert can make it part of their workflow. And now they can delegate to 50 agents underneath them. Makes sense.
I wanted to maybe spend the last few minutes that we have here just talking a little bit about the economics of AI agents, right? Because I think there's this sort of broad notion that we're going from software as a service to service as software, right? This notion that we're able to now move from subscription-based pricing to outcome-based pricing. I mean, it's obviously going to be a journey, and it's a lot of interesting things. But I just wanted to kind of get your perspectives, since you guys are actively engaged with customers. You work a lot with enterprises. From the other perspective, like how do we think about the economic model for AI agents? Maybe Ruchir, start with you.
I'll take 30 seconds and comment on some of the previous discussion on sort of human in the loop. I've been in automation business for 35 years almost. And to me, automation is all about trust. It's literally about trust. When will you not have a human in the loop? If you trust things. The simplest example I take is that almost everybody gets in the morning, gets in your car, start the car, go from your home to your office. How many people know how does an internal combustion engine work? Very few. Most mechanical engineers would have forgotten thermodynamic cycle. And you trust it to work. But key part is, if it doesn't work, you know where to take it to the point that you actually made. And to me, you will this will be kind of a little bit of a slow journey. You will start to trust the outcomes. This goes back to our next point on outcomes. Is that, consistent. Oh, it's becoming boring. It's consistent. Okay, then you will let your hand go a little bit. But until then, you should have a human in the loop.
Yeah.
It's a new process.
Makes sense.
Please have a human in the loop, because you have someone who's been doing this for a long time. Until you get to trust the system, I would recommend everyone to have a human in the loop, because otherwise, just buyer be aware.
Yeah.
I think that's a critical point. And now I'm going to go back to the next point on outcome. This is the point I started with, even on the software part as well. Now, agents bring us closer to the outcomes. And it's again going to be, kind of disrupt some business models, going from the point of ELAs to subscription-based pricing. sort of software, just selling it as a bundle to subscription based to now really outcome based. And to me, it's kind of it's a tug of war between the two. If you're not delivering the outcome, you like to be on the previous one. Just buy this.
Yeah.
If you are really delivering the outcome, then you want to be the other one because you know you are delivering the value and you want the cut of that value actually. So I'm not very sure. You can see people who shift will be the people who really are delivering value versus not. And it's going to be a mixture of models. But I definitely believe we as consumers will start to price a lot more of outcome-based pricing as we continue on this. And because software sort of driven agents bring us closer to that outcome than ever before.
Right.
It's like they become a team member, actually.
More measurable now, right?
Much more measurable now, actually.
Yeah. What are you guys seeing?
I think the way we reason about it, if you look when GPT, let's say 3.5 came out with like token price and throughput and everything, and where is it today? It's like several orders of magnitude. So when we have a lot of internal discussions about this in the team, because like we're cash strapped, like every startup. But in my mind, I just assume that like the marginal cost of intelligence is going to be zero.
Yeah.
It's like how much does it cost to store a terabyte of data? I don't know. It's zero. You just put it on S3. That's fine. And so I think something similar to that like that effect is going to happen. Like we're not there today. So for example, the Anthropic tool use to do a very simple thing, like it takes like not like with $10 worth of tokens. It just makes absolutely no sense. But if you assume that like in a year or 2 years from now, it's going to be 3, 4, maybe 5 orders of magnitude less, then who cares? But that's the supply side. Like I think on the demand side, like a very interesting thing is happening where because of this like outcome-based, value-based thing, you see that this, the new products are actually very expensive because the way people kind of price them is based on the outcome.
Yeah.
And because it's so cheap to make something really good, I think that drives the price down, will eventually like drive the price down for the consumers like the enterprises.
Yeah, and it's very interesting as well to see sort of how incumbents are pricing AI versus startups, right? Incumbents almost are offering AI agents as sort of an add-on. You have an additional subscription on top of your SaaS to use AI, whereas I think startups are more leaning into this notion of, number of leads generated or number of calls deflected. Dan, you guys are at the cutting edge of this, like how you see the pricing model evolving?
Well, the first thing I think from a unit economic perspective for business, I think next year we're going to see an absolute, huge race for acquiring like a multi-agent system and companies building their own multi-agent systems because cost has already been dropping rapidly for intelligence. And I think that's going to make the capabilities of multi-agent systems and their cost increasingly compelling. And so I think next year we're going to see a big increase of interest from enterprise in the multi-agent system space and continuing from the end of this year. And from our perspective, we just think about it as how can we drive lots of value. If you're paying a human $100,000 a year for their time, for that valuable time, well, you probably will be, pegging the agent cost or that you're spending or the value they're generating to that. And so I think for businesses, it actually creates a huge opportunity for capturing a lot more value. And I think if we think about the value software is captured versus what agent kind of companies are going to capture is going to be just, I think, a magnitude difference because of that opportunity to create value that software never was able to, because you're really unleashing the potential of all these companies and the scale of what they can achieve with a multi-agent system. So from our perspective, it's going to be tied closer and closer to the value, whether that's outcome-based or some mixture of usage. I think will be interesting to see, but definitely we're going down that track.
Awesome. Well, maybe, Ruchir, can I give you the closing argument? Where do you see agents in 2025? Is that the year we see agents in production? How do you see the future?
So definitely, we will see agents in production in 2025. It'll be fair to say that it'll be the year of agents. Now, we're still in the beginning era of this. And just think of it as You get a task, you form teams. In software world, we say squads. And you're going to start to see proliferation of agents. Agents do different kind of tasks. Multi-agent systems start to emerge towards the later part of sort of 25, if I may say, practically speaking. But just think about this, and several of us talked about it, in terms of you get complex tasks in real world, how you execute them, you get the right skills, you get the right agents. You form teams around it. They're multi-agent systems. You have some verification sort of around things. You don't leave things willy-nilly. So all of those things that you have learned to execute enterprise tasks for decades are going to come in handy in terms of how these systems will be built and deployed, sort of with deployment starting in certainly 2024, that's the sort of 2025. But as we move towards later part, so a lot of that learning is going to come into play for multi-agent systems as well.
Awesome. Well, I think it's a fascinating conversation. We're actually going to be putting out the second part of our thought leadership piece on AI agents coming out hopefully in the next few weeks. We'll capture a lot of this conversation, but it's clear that this is going to be one of those spaces of AI that's really going to be front and center as we go into next year. Thank you all for participating. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Buried in details, thought I drowned.